From Saturday Night Live to weeds to a great golf course, here's Kevin Nealon.
All we want to do is pump you up.
And now, join me in welcoming the recipient of the 2010 Mark Twain Prize, Tina Fey.
Will Ferrell as our 14th prize winner.
I want to thank Cappy McGarr.
I thank Cappy McGarr.
I want to mention and pay real tribute to Cappy McGarr.
Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Capehart, Associate Editor at The Washington Post. Welcome to Washington Post Live. After a 2-year hiatus, the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor will be awarded at the Kennedy Center on April 24th. This year's awardee, Jon Stewart, known for merging comedy and politics. Joining me now are two men who are no strangers to comedy or the Twain Prize, actor and comedian Kevin Nealon and Cappy McGarr, co-creator of the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. Cappy and Kevin, welcome to Washington Post Live.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for having us. Hi, Cappy.
Hi, Kevin. How are you? You were really good at the honoring Lorne Michaels at the Kennedy Center Honors when you killed that night.
Oh, thank you. I had a lot of fun. It was great to see all those, people from SNL and Lorne and President Biden. I mean, the list. I should have been too nervous to do it.
Well, we're going to get into actually your stint there, Kevin, at the Twain Prize. But before we get there, Cappy, we have to start the conversation off with your new book, the name of it being The Man Who Made Mark Twain Famous, Stories from the Kennedy Center, the White House, and Other Comedy Venues. And Cappy, you call Mark Twain our first stand-up comedian. What do you want people to know about Twain's humor that they might not have already known?
Twain, as many people know, had two spectacular books, many other great books, but Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer were two great books. It made him a lot of money. And he invested in this teletype machine, which he lost all of his money in. So he had to make money. So he went around to all of the theaters around the United States and did stand-up comedy. I mean, he told stories. He told about funny stories about Congress. He was self-effacing. And he really does have an incredible sense of humor and was so effective and so important of all those who followed him. So Mark Twain, we thought it was very important to name the National Award for Humor after Mark Twain because, quite frankly, Jon Stewart epitomizes what Mark Twain stood for. He's a social commentary, is John's cornerstone, and also he's a very funny guy.
Well, and I want to talk about Jon Stewart in a moment, but Cappy, you write about how the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor was conceived. Because there really is no other honor for comedians, do you think comedians aren't getting the credit they deserve?
They do not, Jonathan. That's a very good point. The Oscars are for movies. The Emmys are for television. We try to start something that would honor comedians. Comedians are so important in our lives. We've got too many problems in our everyday life. We've got the Russia-Ukraine problems. We've got problems every day. And so it's really important for us to stop once a year and honor all of those who bring joy to our lives and bring humor to our lives. So that's really one of the important reasons that the Mark Twain Prize exists, is to honor our comedians, honors those who make us laugh, honor those, quite frankly, like Kevin.
One more question before I get to you, Kevin. And just a second ago, Cappy, you said that Jon Stewart, and if I'm remembering right, he epitomizes Mark Twain. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, Twain was he was a social commentary. He had social commentary. He was a very funny guy. He had a sense of humor. He was a satirist, and And Jon Stewart is that. I mean, he is a satirist. He has been very actively involved in the social arena, whether we're talking about the 9/11 survivors or whoever we're talking about. Jon Stewart really does talk about the issues of the day, but he also does it in a very satirical way. And his show, The Daily Show, was so influential with all those who were on his show, that he is really one of the most important people in comedy today.
So, Kevin, back to the question I asked a moment ago about whether comedians get the credit they deserve. You're a comedian. Do you get the credit you deserve, Kevin?
First of all, I'm very underrated, so I would say no. No, I certainly feel like I am appreciated, and I never thought I would be a professional comedian until I am one now, and so I'm really appreciative of all the credit I do get, and the people that really come out, and you could tell how much they like you and appreciate you. I was on an airplane a couple of years ago, and I just finished watching a kind of a sad movie, and then this woman came up to me. She knelt down next to my seat, and she said, "I just want to let you know that my best friend was going through cancer, and it didn't look good, but you got her through all the difficult times." I got all choked up. I thought, wow, people do appreciate comedy, and they do give you credit.
So, Kevin, then what is the key to good comedy?
Well, for me, it's got to be original. I like originality. I like uniqueness. When I first started out, my three major influences were Andy Kaufman, Albert Brooks, and Steve Martin, because I knew that they were so different from all the other comics. And so that's what I appreciated. And I kind of, when I first started out, I kind of molded myself after those guys, where I tried to be unique and original. And to this day, I still try to do that. But good comedy, I think, it's subjective. A lot of people like more of the ranting comics. Other people like more of the laid back comics. So I think it is subjective. But for me, I like uniqueness and originality.
Mm-hmm. What do you consider to be your greatest strength comedically?
I think my greatest strength is, aside from being original, I think it's making the audience feel relaxed. And once they're relaxed, they're much more acceptable to what you have to offer, and they trust you. And that's where I get them. I turn on them.
That is true. As someone who is a Kevin Nealon fan, I've often felt double-crossed by you when I'm sitting there listening to the joke and then get, whoa.
Yeah.
But always funny.
Gary Shandling once told me, your comedy sneaks up on people. You're already on to the next bit, and they're finally getting the last bit.
And that's what
so
makes
I need a time delay like we have now for my stand-up. I need a time delay.
And that's for me, that's what makes comedy so fun, is listening to the jokes. And as a writer, I'm listening, but I'm listening to the writing and following along. And what makes a joke funny becomes hilarious to me when I follow the written arc of it. But Kevin, you performed the night Eddie Murphy won the Twain Prize in 2015. Let's listen to a little bit of your performance.
Tonight, all of this centers around someone, for my money, I think is probably the funniest man who ever lived, Mark Twain. I mean, how does he come up with this stuff? Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are here to honor Eddie Murphy, and I must say, I find it remarkable just how much Mark Twain and Eddie Murphy have in common. I don't know if you know this, but Mark Twain was born during the year of Halley's Comet, and in a rare occurrence, 76 years later, the day Mark Twain died, Halley's Comet streaked across the sky again. Now, here's where it gets eerie. The year that Eddie Murphy was born, his father was driving a Mercury Comet. Wait, there's more. 25 years later, when Eddie lost his virginity in the back seat of that Mercury Comet to a girl named Haley, who later streaked across the parking lot.
And that is the perfect example of what we were just talking about how you pull us in all serious and then you turn on us in a very comedic way. Another Twain Prize winner is Saturday Night Live creator Lorne Michaels. He's discovered hundreds of comedians for decades. And Cappy, how important is Michaels in discovering comedians, so many of whom are household names, like the guy in the box below you?
Well, I think Lorne Michaels is the most important person in comedy in the last 50 years. I mean, you think of all the people that were on Saturday Night Live: Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Eddie Murphy, Bill Murray. I mean, go on and on and on. Kevin, obviously, but Lorne is incredibly. In fact, there's very few people that have been honored by the Mark Twain, the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize for Humor, and the Kennedy Center Honors, and Lorne Michaels is so incredibly important that he's has been awarded both of those honors. He's incredibly important.
And Kevin, you joined the cast of Saturday Night Live in 1986. Talk about your first encounter with Lorne Michaels.
Well, my first encounter was the audition at 30 Rock, which I don't really remember that much of. But I remember walking into that studio, and as soon as I walked in, I got really tired because I remember I used to fall asleep watching that show. So it was an association thing. But that was the first time. That was the first time I kind of encountered Lorne. But I didn't really talk to him much. He was just sitting with the other, cast members watching me. But I remember the first time I was about to do a sketch on SNL. It was called Mr. Subliminal, and it was a little, intricate because I had two conversations going on at once, and we were away at commercial. And this is my first sketch ever on the show. And we're maybe 5 seconds away from commercial. I'm about to do my first sketch, and Lorne Michaels comes up alongside me. He puts his hand on my shoulder, and he says, "Are you sure this is what you want?" So that was so that took my mind off of being so nervous.
Now, is it true Dana Carvey is the one who introduced you to?
Well, Dana and I shared a house in the Hollywood Hills with a couple other comics, and Dana, he would live over the garage when he was in town, so he had a little studio apartment up there. So we used to hang out a lot. And that summer, he got selected to be on SNL. This is back in the 1900s, Jonathan. And he goes off to New York. And I'm really happy for him. I couldn't be more proud. And here I know somebody that's going to be on SNL. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call out of the blue from Dana. He goes, "Kev, it's Dana. I'm out at Lorne Michaels' house in Long Island. I'm in the back bedroom. Guess who's in the kitchen? Bill Murray." I'm like, "No way." He goes, "Yeah." Anyway, Lorne is looking for one more cast member. I told him about you. I think he's going to want to see your audition tapes. I'm like, "Bill Murray's in the kitchen?" I wasn't even hearing the other stuff because I knew I'd never get on that show because I don't do like characters or impressions or accents or dialects like Dana does. I'm just a stand-up, a really, really good stand-up. But so I send in my tapes. 2 weeks later, I get another call from Dana. "Kev, I'm back at Lorne Michaels' house. I'm in the back bedroom. Guess who's in the kitchen? Steve Martin." What? Yes. Anyway, good news. Lorne liked your tapes. I think they're going to fly you in for an audition. I'm like, Steve Martin's in the kitchen? You see, I wouldn't even believe it. So, he goes, "Anyway, good news. Lorne liked your tapes. I think we're going to fly you in for an audition." And I'm like, "That's great." So I feel it's at least it's a free trip to New York, And so I go in there and I go to 30 Rock and I go to Studio AH. I do my audition. 2 weeks later, I find myself sitting in a high rise in Beverly Hills across from Lorne. He's, offering me a job in SNL. And I said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Michaels. Let me think about it over the weekend."
Wait.
And he saw right through. That's the way I roll. That's how I negotiate things. That's how I massage the deal. How do you think I ended up on your show? I worked it. Well, he saw right through it.
I just want to say, the audition for Lorne Michaels led to a paying gig. This is free.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'm sure I got a lot of paying gigs out of this one.
Oh my God! You just a moment ago you talked about how your jokes. Someone told you your jokes have like a 10-second delay, and it's playing out right here, right here on camera. Cappy, let's talk about another one. Will Ferrell. You wrote that Will Ferrell's acceptance speech was your favorite, and you wrote this. We had 15 or 20 ceramic versions of the Mark Twain bust, which is bronze, and you see it there. He came out on stage, ladies and gentlemen, Will Ferrell, and he actually dropped it, and it shattered into 1,000 pieces. He put the pieces on the pedestal, and then put Mark Twain's broken head on the pedestal and said, "I'm going to treasure this forever." I tried to read this slowly enough so that folks could see what happens here, but this is the best part. When he puts the head there on the broken bust. I don't know how many times, Cappy, that was y'all rehearsed that or talked about that, but it made me wonder in watching that bit, wondering who was, of all the comedians you've honored, who's your favorite? And I know you can't pick favorites because they're all your kids, but which awardee really lived up to the spirit of the Twain Prize?
They all live up to the spirit of the Twain Prize. They're all funny. They've all, Neil Simon was our first person we honored that was a writer. But they're all funny. They're all, Kevin's heroes are my heroes too. Steve Martin, Bill Murray. Bill Murray is the most incredibly nice person like ever. I took him into the White House, and I started this tradition of taking all the Mark Twain Prize honorees into the Oval Office to do a photo op with the president, and then taking them on a tour of the White House in the afternoon. But Bill Murray, when I took Bill Murray and his family, he literally stopped and shook everyone's hand. I don't care who you were at the White House, if you were a guard, he wanted to go in the kitchen. He met all the waiters and he looked everybody in the eye, and he just was an incredibly nice person. And then we get into the Oval Office, and the White House had called me a couple of weeks earlier and said, "Look, would Bill do an Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare, public service announcement?" And I said, "Sure, let me call him and ask him." And so I called Bill, and he said, "Yes, but I don't want. I want it ad-libbed. I do not want any script at all." So we get to the White House a little early. We're in the cabinet room. This young kid comes in and gives Bill a script and says, "Mr. Murray, this is your script for the Affordable Health Care Act PSA." And Bill looked at me and goes, "Cappy, I said no script." And I looked at this young kid and I said, "Look, the president's a great ad-libber. Go back in and tell him that wasn't the deal. Bill's doing ad-libbing." So we get in there, we do the photo op with the Mark Twain Prize, and we exchange funnies. And then they start the Affordable Health Care Act PSA. And the president said, "Let's do a putting contest." And he put down a paper cup. And Bill says, "I'm not putting in a paper cup. It doesn't clink. I want something that when I put it in, it clinks." And so the president yells out, "Anybody, we got a glass around here, a glass cup?" So they bring a glass cup. President gives Bill a putter. And the president said, "I'll bet you $1 a hole." And Bill says, "You're on." And the president is very competitive. And he's not going to lose $1 to Bill Murray if he can help it. Bill putted every single ball in, and the president missed every single ball. And so they were talking back and forth about the Affordable Health Care Act, and Bill starts limping, and the president says, "What's wrong?" He says, "Oh, I got a bum knee and a bum hip." He said, "Well, do you have health care insurance?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, you can sign up for the Affordable Health Care Act." And Bill says, pauses, comedic timing, perfect. He goes, "Well, does it take care of mental issues?" And the president said, "Well, as a matter of fact, Bill, it does." And so we're walking out. The president turns to me and said, "Cappy, do you play golf?" I said, "Yeah, not very well." He said, "Well, if you bet, you got to pay up at the end of the game." I said, "Yes, Mr. President, you owe Bill Murray $5. So the president turns to his aide and goes, "Do you have $5? I owe it to Bill Murray." So there was no pictures taken of that, but anyway, Bill took the $5 and said thank you. And then Bill and I actually went and put it on the Eisenhower Green right outside the Oval Office. So, if I had to pick one moment that was really fun in the Oval Office, it had to be with Bill Murray.
Kevin, can I get you to talk about another Oval Office visit, also with President Obama, and that was the interaction in 2015 between President Obama and Eddie Murphy?
Well, I took Eddie in, and the president says, "Eddie, you and I are the same age. You have no gray hair, and I've got a lot of gray hair." And Eddie said, "Well, Mr. President, you've got a very stressful job. You're the head of the free world." And he said, "All I do is make people laugh." And so the President Obama turned to me and he said, "Well, Cappy, I'm funny, aren't I?" And when the president asks a question like that, you say, Yes, Mr. President, you are really funny." He said, "And I've got good timing, don't I?" I went, "You have perfect timing." And so the president says, "Well, Eddie, I'm a big fan of yours. I know Raw and Delirious by heart." And so I didn't, because of the subject matter and maybe some of the words in Raw and Delirious, I did not ask the president to quote any of those shows, but the president was very gracious, and we went into the Situation Room, and all these young kids that are got to be 40 years or younger, and they're monitoring all the situation all over the world. They all stand up, and Eddie goes, "Sit down. I don't want the world to blow up." And but anyway, Eddie was very gracious and took his picture to every single person that was in that national security area. But it was a lot of fun. By the way, it was right before the Hillary Clinton Trump election in November, and this is October, and I'm taking Eddie and his family around on a tour of the White House, and Eddie's looking at the Ronald Reagan portrait that I'm behind him, and I go, "Well, Eddie, welcome to the White House. Mommy and I are glad to have you here. Just don't rearrange the furniture." He turns around and he goes, "That's really that's really good Reagan. Do it anymore." I said, "Well, I'll do Carter." He said, "Well, let me hear your Carter." I go, "Well, the White House is a great example for Habitat for Humanity." He goes, "Well, okay, well, do any more?" I said, "Well, do Clinton." I said, "Okay, I'll do Clinton. I hope Hillary wins. I'll be interviewing interns, if you know what I mean." Anyway, Eddie Murphy is a wonderful. Come on, Jonathan. Eddie is a wonderful guy and a really stand-up guy and one of the funniest guys around for sure.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, have you met any presidents? Because I'm wondering, who do you think was our funniest president, either intentionally or unintentionally?
Well, there's been many, actually. I think the most underrated, prop-wise, was Abraham Lincoln. I mean, with the stovepipe hat. I mean, that's good stuff right there. But yeah, he was more of a prop comic. And a lot of people don't know this. During the Gettysburg Address, originally he had a lot of jokes sprinkled in there, kind of take off the onus of it all. Also, Theodore Roosevelt with a monocle. I mean, come on, does it get any better than that? That's funny. But I would say probably Obama is the most. I mean, he seemed the most. Comedically, he was very good. I mean, you see him at those correspondent dinners, and with Keegan-Michael Key. He's very open to. I think he realized how much comedy takes a lot of the stress and pressure off of world events.
I think if I'm looking at the clock right, we've got a little more than 5 minutes. We can't talk comedy without talking about what just happened on the Oscar stage Sunday night. Comedian Chris Rock tells a joke about Will Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, and then next thing we know, there's the slap heard round the world. I would love for each of you just to talk about either your reaction to whether you thought the joke was an appropriate joke to tell, your reaction to the slap. Cappy, you go first.
Oh yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate that. It's like too many people have said too much stuff about this, but I thought it was terrible. Will Smith should not have done that. Chris Rock is a comedian. He was trying to be funny and trying to do a joke. Lenny Bruce was a provocative comedian. So was George Carlin, and so is Chris Rock. And Chris Rock may have said a joke that didn't sit well with people, but that was just uncalled for Will Smith to go and slap him. My only suggestion is that comedians probably need to raise a GoFundMe page for comedians to have security. That's all I can say.
And Kevin, as a stand-up comedian, leave aside the joke, leave aside the comedian and what happened. As a stand-up comedian, how much do you take into account your own personal safety when you are up on stage and telling jokes?
Well, a lot more now than after that happened. But I'm horrified right now because I see my computer's going to die. It says it's running out of power soon. I don't even know why I did that, but anyway, that really did change a lot. My act is really not that aggressive or edgy, so I don't do those kinds of jokes where I'm more of a roast kind of a guy. Mine is more laid back, but I bet a lot of comics now will think twice and kind of watch the audience and make sure nobody's rushing the stage, to slap them or whatever.
And
And
Kevin,
I think Will Smith,
go ahead.
he should have been. I think he should have been ushered out of there. I mean, that was my biggest
100%.
complaint, and
Yeah,
it was just a crime. It was a crime that everybody witnessed around the world, and I mean, look at with the Oscars, that must have been seen by over 1,000 people.
Times 100, if my math is right, or maybe times 1,000. Billions, maybe even billions of people. But in terms of let's talk about that joke. Just as a joke, from a craftsman's perspective, Kevin, was it a good joke?
I don't think it was a good joke, but regardless, he shouldn't have been confronted like that. He could have gone up to him afterwards and said, hey, man, that was out of line. I really found that offensive. My wife, I don't even think, Chris knew that she had that disease. So, but I don't think it was the greatest joke, and it was, it was a little unsettling. But still, no matter what, we know Chris Rock, we know the kind of edginess he has.
Mm-hmm. Cappy, do you think that what happened to Chris Rock will have any kind of chilling effect on comedians or on comedy?
I hope not. I mean, free speech is so important to our country. Comedians say stuff all the time that may or may not be funny to some people, but I mean, you take the Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle should not have been criticized for his closer deal. He's need to lift up trans people, not take down Dave Chappelle. And it's very upsetting that people criticize comedians who try to be funny. They try to bring laughter in our lives. They try to bring joy in our lives. And, sometimes humor crosses the line, and most of the time it doesn't. But we all need to be thankful that we have the free speech and the comedians can say whatever they want to say.
And Kevin, in terms of, that there is that fine line, and as Cappy said, when folks go over the line, I'm just wondering, from your perspective as a comedian, should comedians be held accountable for crossing over that line?
First of all, if you lose me, thank you for having me on my show. I love talking to you. But should they be held responsible? I agree with Cappy. It's freedom of speech. I guess there are some circumstances where you should be a little more respectful and thoughtful. But I think that's up to the comedian. And if he's not or she's not, then maybe they don't work as much. But
Well
yeah,
said.
I don't believe in censorship or not having freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm. Cappy, you were saying something real quick?
No, Kevin, said the exact right thing. I mean, it is up. Free speech is the cornerstone of our democracy, and we should not censorship at all. The Kennedy Center doesn't censor any comedian that gets on the stage, and sometimes that has been okay, and other times maybe some comedians have crossed the line. But free speech is a very important thing in our democracy, and we need to make sure that comedians continue the satire and making fun of people, and sometimes we need to make sure that they make fun of people in the right and correct way. We need to punch up, not punch down, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, they're not censored when they're on the stage, but when it's broadcast on television, there's a bleep. we don't get to hear the fun words in their entirety. Kevin, real fast, because we are actually out of time, but I'm dying to know, where are you?
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee.
Is that your house? Or are you,
No, no,
you
no.
at a
I'm,
roadside bar?
I'm at a friend's house. Yeah, who kind of
Uh-huh.
designed it as a roadside bar. Oh, you're very smart. You know about that roadside bar thing. You
You
must
know.
be a big drinker.
And here I was going to say a reporter. But with that, actor and comedian Kevin Nealon, Cappy McGarr, author of, where's the name of your book? The Man Who Made Mark Twain Famous, Stories from the Kennedy Center at the White House and Other Comedy Venues. Thank you both very much for coming to
Jonathan,
Washington Post Live.
Jonathan, I
Yeah?
just want to let you know that I have a book coming out too this fall. It's called
yeah.
I Exaggerate. It's my brushes with fame, and it's a lot of caricatures I've drawn about celebrities, and then an anecdote on the opposite page talking about that person. So I'm excited. It'll be out in October.
Very
In
nice. Look
October.
forward to reading it, Kevin.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank
Great.
you.
Well, you know what, Kevin? That's a great way to invite yourself back.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's why I did it.
Clever, Kevin Nealon. Kevin, Cappy, again, thank you for joining us today.
Jonathan, well done. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bye, Cappy.
All right. And thank you for joining us. To check out what other interviews we have coming up, go to WashingtonPostLive.com. Once again, I'm Jonathan Capehart, Associate Editor at The Washington Post. Thank you for tuning in to Washington Post Live.